She slammed both hands off the piano keys. 38 seconds. That's how long she lasted before the notes fell apart under her fingers. And the room laughed. A billionaire had dragged her out of the doorway in front of 40 people. She'd asked him for a job washing dishes. He pointed at a $100,000 concert grand and said, "Play or starve." Now phones were up. Now the laughing was spreading table to table. Now he was reaching for his wallet, saying, "That's all right, sweetheart. Nobody's judging you." She didn't turn around. She put her hands back on the keys, and she said, "I'm not finished." A chair came back from a table with a sound like a small announcement. The man who stood up was 58 years old and 6'1", and his suit had a shoulder line that had been argued about in a fitting room on Madison Avenue. Silver hair cut short. A face that photographed well from the left, which he knew. He came down the length of the dining room without hurrying, shoes on mumble. 40 people watching him and pretending not to. "Gentlemen," Hollis Prescott said, though there was only one, "what's the trouble?" The young man at Hote's stand straightened so fast his collar moved. "Mr. Prescott, I'm very sorry. I was just explaining to this young lady that we don't have any openings." And he turned, and he looked at her. He took his time about it. He went from the sneakers up, and he did it slowly enough that every person at the nearest 4 tables understood they were being invited to watch. The backpack held against her front like something she was protecting. The sole starting to lift on the right shoe, the shirt. He saw that the shirt was clean. He saw that something was the one clean thing, and something crossed his face that was not pity. It was closer to interest, the way a man looks at a bird that's gotten into a building. "And what were you hoping to find here?" he said. "Work. Work." He turned the word over. "What kind?" "Any kind. I can wash dishes. I can bus. I've done prep. I've done overnight janitorial for 8 months. And I have references. References, yes. From whom? My supervisor. And where does your supervisor supervise? Harmon Tower, Water Street. Ah, a small nod. You clean offices. Yes, at night. Yes. And you'd like to clean plates instead, during the day. In a dining room. He opened one hand toward the room, generous, taking it all in. The chandelier, the marble, the $68 scallops, here. I'd like a job. Everyone would like a job. That isn't a qualification, that's a mood. Somebody laughed, not many. 3 people at 2 tables. But 3 is enough. 3 is the number where a room decides what it's going to be. Imani Stroud felt it land in her chest and go straight through and come out the back. And she heard her father's voice from a very long way off saying, "Don't you ever let a man see it land." So she lifted her chin. And a woman at table 470 years old, sitting alone with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, put her cup down and did not pick it back up. "I'm willing to prove I can work," Imani said. Hollis smiled. That was the thing about it. It was a good smile, warm at the mouth, empty at the eyes. He had been doing that smile for 30 years in rooms where money changed hands, and it had bought him 240 hotels. "Are you?" he said. "Yes." "Good. Then let's do that." He turned to the room and opened his arms slightly, a man stepping up to a lectern. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. This young woman has come in asking for work, and I think that's admirable. I do, sincerely." Then back to her. "Entertainment," he said, "is part of the experience here." And he gestured 40 feet, the far corner, under the chandelier. A 9-foot Steinway concert grand, lid down, bench pushed all the way in. Imani's stomach went out from under her. "You play something," Hollis said. "Anything at all. And if it's worth listening to, I will personally see to it that you eat today, and that Mr. Pyle here finds you a shift." "On my word." In front of all these people, he spread his hands. "That's a real offer. That's better than an application. That's a chance to earn it in one afternoon, in front of witnesses, which is more than most people ever get." Behind him, the kitchen door swung. Gideon Pyle came through it fast with his tie already going to his throat, and he took in the whole scene in about a second and a half, and he opened his mouth, and Hollis Prescott, without turning around, said, "Gideon, it's fine." Gideon Pyle closed his mouth. That was all. Under 2 seconds. Nobody in that room would remember it except Gideon, who would remember it for the rest of his life. The dining room had gone completely silent now. Forks down, conversations abandoned in the middle. At the window, a young woman visiting from Ohio with her aunt slid her phone off the tablecloth and into her lap without deciding to. At table 9, a freelance reporter who had come in that afternoon to write 800 words about the whole new pastry program turned to a clean page. Something simple, Hollis said, and his voice was pleasant again, expansive, a man doing a kindness. Nobody expects a recital. Play a hymn, play a pop song, play Heart and Soul. I'll take Heart and Soul. Chopsticks, somebody said from a table, trying to be funny. Nobody picked it up. Imani heard it anyway. And something happened in her chest that she had not felt in 9 months. And she wants to be clear about this, because people got it wrong afterward. It was not courage. It was not dignity. It was anger, clean and cold and very old. Because she was standing in a 5-star dining room being offered a hymn by a man in a $4,000 suit, and 40 feet away sat a concert instrument that had not been properly played in 6 years. And she could see from where she stood that the fallboard was closed but not latched, and that the bench was still at factory height, and that somebody tuned that piano well and often, and nobody, not one person, ever asked it to do anything. It sat there being expensive, like everything else in the room. I'm going to play Heart and Soul, Imani said. Hollis raised his eyebrows, delighted. No. Well. He glanced around, gathering his audience. What then? And Imani Stroud said, Chopin, Opus 25, number 11. To understand why a 21-year-old woman with $19 in her pocket said that sentence out loud, you have to go back about 10 hours to a carpet on the 31st floor. The building was called Harmon Tower, and nobody who worked in it at 3 in the morning had ever met anybody who worked in it at 3 in the afternoon. Imani liked that. She liked the hum of the floor buffer. She liked the way the city looked from up there. All those windows lit for nobody. 10,000 rooms glowing with no one inside them. She liked the smell of the industrial lemon cleaner, which was not a smell anybody would choose, but it was hers, and there was something in that. What she did not like was the carpet on 31. That's the 3rd time this week, said Cordell Vance. He stood in the doorway with a mop handle over his shoulder like a rifle. 60, 3 old, gray at the temples, a back that had been telling him things for a decade and getting ignored. Somebody up here can't hold a cup, Imani said. Somebody up here makes $400,000 a year and has never once thrown away his own trash. Then he should get a bigger cup. Cordell laughed. It came out of him the way something gets let out of a room. He'd been running the overnight crew at Harmon for 19 years. He knew every stairwell, every jammed door, every security guard's name, and every one of their kids' names, too. He'd brought Imani on 8 months back through the agency, and he had never once asked her the question everybody else asked, which was, what happened to you? He handed her a set of keys and said, 31 through 36, don't take the elevator. With the mop bucket, it trips the sensor. That was it. That was the whole interview. You eat tonight? He said. I ate. What'd you eat? Cordell, I'm asking what you ate. It's a simple question. People answer it all the time. Imani sat back on her heels. The cleaner had gotten under her fingernails and turned the beds of them white. Her knuckles were cracked at 3 of the joints, in that specific way that happens in October when your hands go from hot water to cold air 14 times a night. A sandwich, she said. From where? From a place. He set the mop against the wall, went into the cart, came back with a paper bag, folded over twice at the top, the way a man folds a bag when somebody used to fold his. He put it on the floor next to her. That's not charity, he said. My wife makes too much. It goes bad. You'd be doing me a favor. Imani looked at the bag. She does not pick it up, which is a thing a person can do. You cannot pick something up that you are going to and still need the 4 seconds first. Thank you, she said. He started off toward 32, over his shoulder, not turning. Eat it before your break, or you'll give it to somebody else. I know you. She waited until he was gone. Then she opened the bag. Turkey, good mustard, and somebody had cut the crusts off. He sat on a carpet on the 31st floor at 4 in the morning, holding a sandwich with the crusts cut off, made by a 63-year-old man who had told her a wife made it. And she thought, that is not true, and I am not going to ask. She ate half. She wrapped the other half and put it in her bag. Her break was at 4:15, and she took it in the loading dock stairwell. Because the break room had a television bolted to the wall and then the news on a loop, and the news that October was full of a hospital merger she did not want to hear about. She sat on the 3rd step from the bottom. Then she took out the envelope. She'd been carrying it 9 days, and it had gone soft at the corners the way paper does when it lives against a person's back. Hartzell and Rohn, attorneys at law. She knew what it said. She'd read it 4 times. She read it again. Following our review, our recommendation is unchanged. Given the sum involved and the absence of assets, Chapter 7 is the appropriate remedy. The process takes 4 to 6 months. Your credit will recover in 7 to 10 years. There is no moral failing in this. It is a mechanism the law provides precisely for circumstances such as yours. Please call. We can begin this week. She read the one phrase again, no moral failing in this, and she thought about her father at the kitchen table on Lenox Road with a pencil behind his ear and a legal pad in front of him. The phone bill and the light bill and the car note laid out in 3 columns like sheet music. Otis Stroud taught middle school band for 29 years. He owned 4 ties. He drove a Buick with 190,000 miles on it, and he changed the oil himself in the alley behind the building. And when Imani Yassi was 9 years old and asked him why he didn't just get a new car, he'd said a thing she had never once been able to put down since. A man's word is a promise he makes to who he's going to be, and then he went back under the hood. 29 years. He never once failed to pay something he'd said he would pay. Imani folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope back against her spine, and she did not call Hartzell and Roan that week either. The number was $211,480. She knew it the way you know your own birthday, 211,480. It had been $340,000 before the insurance did what insurance does, which is I arrive, apologize, and a smaller number behind. The rest of it belonged to her because of a signature. That was the whole thing. The entire architecture of her life fit on one line. She had been 20 years old, standing at a counter on the 4th floor of a hospital in Brooklyn at 2 in the morning. And a woman in scrubs had slid a clipboard across and said, just here, and initial there, and Imani signed. She signed because her father was down the hall with a tube in his throat. She signed because the woman said the word authorization. She signed because she was 20 years old, and there was nobody else in the building whose last name was Stroud. Her mother was already gone. Verna Stroud died at the scene on the Belt Parkway on a Thursday night in August, and a man in a waiting room with a humming vending machine told Imani that at 11:40 and then asked her if she wanted to sit down, so there was nobody else. So she signed a financial responsibility agreement at 2 in the morning with no lawyer, no parent, and nobody in the room who had ever seen one of those before. Her father lived 11 days. 11 days of a machine breathing for a man who had spent 29 years teaching 12-year-olds to count to 4. Then he died anyway, and the paper stayed. The paper always stays. That's the part nobody tells you. The crash gets 1 line. The funerals get 1 line. The paperwork gets a decade. She'd been a 3rd year at the Halloran Conservatory on West 65th Street, piano performance. 2.5 years in the studio of Dr. Odessa Bramblett. And then Bramblett retired, and Imani got a younger man with soft hands and a great many opinions. She had been playing since she was 5, because her mother played the 8:45 service and the 11:15 at Greater Bethel for 22 years. And there was a piano in the house, the way there was a stove in the house. It was equipment. You used it. Verna taught her scales on a Baldwin, upright the color of Strongkong coffee, with a cigarette burn on the left side of the board from an owner nobody ever identified, and a middle C that had gone slightly bright from 40 years of being the note everybody starts on. Imani could still hear that C a little too bright, a little sharp of itself. She had 13 months of school left when the phone rang on a Thursday night in August. She went back for 2 weeks after the funerals because she thought that's what you did. She sat in a practice room on the 4th floor with the door closed and put her hands on the keys, and nothing happened. Not nothing emotionally. Nothing. Her hands would not go. She sat there for 50 minutes while the metronome ticked, and her hands stayed in her lap like 2 objects somebody had set down on a table. The financial aid office called her in that September. A kind woman with a photograph of a beagle on her desk laid out 3 options and slid a form across and said, "Hey, this is an emergency hardship with her grant. It does not have to be repaid. Half our students," and Imani said no. She has thought about that no 1,000 times since. She has taken it apart and put it back together, and she still cannot tell you whether it was strength or something wearing strength's coat. Because here is what she said, out loud, at 20 years old, to a woman who was trying to help her. "I don't take money I didn't earn." And the woman said very gently, "Imani, that isn't what this is." And Imani said, "That's what it feels like." She withdrew on a Thursday. She did not tell Ahis why he was leaving, not the department, not her studio, not the 4 people she'd eaten lunch with every day for 2.5 years. And she has never once been back to West 65th Street. Not the building, not the sidewalk, not even to walk past it on the other side. She lost off the apartment on Lenox Road in February. There was no drama in it. There was a letter, and then another letter, and then a marshal's notice, and then a Tuesday. She stayed from a friend's couch in East Flatbush for 6 weeks. Tilden's boyfriend moved back in. Then a rooming house on Ralph Avenue that took cash weekly, and had a bathroom shared by 9 people, and a man on the 2nd floor who screamed at 3 in the morning. And she stayed there until her money ran out in May. Then the shelter on Bushwick Avenue. But before all of that, in January, she sold her mother's piano. That's the part she has never told anybody, not Cordell, not the woman at the shelter. Nobody. She did not lose it. Nobody repossessed it. There was no man with a clipboard and a truck and a court order. She called a shop on Flatbush that took used uprights. A man came out on a Saturday and lifted the lid and played a G major scale with one finger and pressed the pedal twice and said the pin block was tired and there was a crack in the soundboard he'd have to work around. He said he could do $2,900 cash today, and he'd handle the movers, $2,900, against $211,480. That is 1.37%. She has done that math. She has done it more than once. She sat on the floor of an emptying apartment while 2 men in weight belts walked her mother's piano down 3 flights of stairs, and it made a sound going around the 2nd floor landing. A low soft groan from inside the case. All those strings speaking at once from being tipped over, and Amani heard it and thought, that's the last time it ever says anything. Then she signed the receipt. Then she walked 11 blocks to the payment center on Atlantic and put $2,900 against a $211,000 hospital bill. And a woman behind bulletproof glass printed a slip and pushed it through the tray and said, anything else, huh? And Amani said no and walked out into January. And here is the thing that broke her, the actual thing. The thing she has never said out loud to another human being, including a 63-year-old man who feeds her sandwiches with the crusts cut off. Her father was already dead, 5 months dead. She did not sell for that piano to save him. There was no ambulance racing anywhere. There was no doctor standing in a hallway saying, if we can get him another week. She sold her mother's piano to pay a bill for a man who was already in the ground. She traded it for a receipt. That is why she stopped playing. Not grief, not the calluses, which came later, not the absence of an instrument, because this city is full of instruments. There are pianos in church basements and community centers and the lobby of the Port Authority with a sign on it that says plain. She stopped because every single time she put her hands near a keyboard, she heard that groan on the 2nd floor landing. And a voice in her went, You traded her for 1.37%. 9 months. She had not touched a piano in 9 months. The shelter on Bushwick Avenue let you back again at 7 and put you at 8:30 in. It was clean, and the woman at the desk was decent, and Amani had a bin. The bin mattered. You got a plastic bin with your name on masking tape, and it lived on a numbered shelf. And inside Amani's bin there was a hairbrush, a folder, a phone charger, a pair of shoes she did not wear, and a manila envelope she never opened. That Tuesday mornings, she stood at the shelf with the lid off, and did the inventory she did every single morning. It was not about the objects. It was about proving she's still a system. Systems were the whole difference. She got up at 6:40. She washed her face and both arms to the elbow. She brushed her hair out and put it back. She kept one shirt clean at all times in a gallon freezer bag, and she changed into it in the bathroom before she went out. And she changed out of it the second she came back, and that shirt had gotten her through 9 interviews in 5 months. 9 interviews. 0 offers, because the application asks for an address, because the second interview asks about the gap, because when you say I withdrew from school for family reasons, the man across the desk nods slowly and writes something down, and you can see through the back of the paper that it is not a word, it's a check mark. She put the shirt on, buttoned it wrong, unbuttoned it, did it again. Her hands were shaking a little, and she looked at them in the mirror over the sink and had a thought she was not proud of. These used to be worth something. She shut it down. She was good at shutting things down. It was practically a marketable skill. She'd made her list the night before, on the back of her receipts, 6 places, all restaurants and hotels, all of them hiring per the window or the website, and she had walked the route in her head twice, so she would not waste a single step. The last name on the list was the Meridian Grand on 57th Street. She had almost crossed it off twice, because everybody knew about the Meridian. Because the Meridian was where a plate of scallops cost $68, and the bar had a bourbon on it that came with its own small ceremony. But they were hiring, it said so in plain type. Dishwashers, prep, porters, apply in person. Apply in person. She folded the receipt and put it in her pocket. The first place said the position had been filled that morning. The second place said, come back Monday. And when Imani said she could start today, the man said, right. But come back Monday, and something in the way he said it made it clear that Monday was not a real day. The third place was a diner on 9th Avenue with a help wanted sign in the window that had gone yellow from the sun. The woman behind the register looked at Imani's shoes. That was all, just the shoes. 2 seconds, and she said, we're not really doing that right now. And Imani says, the sign says, and the woman said, I know what the sign says. Stood on the sidewalk for a moment afterward. Traffic went by. A bus knelt at the curb and sighed and pulled away. She thought about the half sandwich in her bag, the one she'd been saving since 4:15 that morning for a moment when she'd really need it. And she understood that she was not going to eat it now either, because eating it would mean admitting this was that moment. She kept walking. The fourth place had a manager who was actually kind, which was somehow harder, and who told her the truth, which was that they hired through ASFIS, and the service required a permanent address. The fifth place did not have a door on the street. It had a lobby and a desk in the lobby, and a man at the desk who said applications were online only. The posting says apply in person. The posting's out of date. When did it change? The man looked at her for a second. It's online only, he said, 57th Street, 4th block, 5th, and then the awning. The Meridian Grand had a canopy the color of a good suit and a doorman who did not look at her. That was almost worse. Not being looked at. She went through the revolving door, and the temperature changed, and the sound changed, and the floor under her sneakers went from concrete to marble, and there was a noise in that room she had not heard in 9 months. Silverware. That's real silverware on real china. That small, clear ringing, 20 tables of it, and underneath the low, steady murmur of people who are not worried about anything. She stood on the marble with her whole life in a backpack, 12 pounds. She had waited once on the shelter, back when she still believed that knowing things would help. Ahead of her, a host stand with a small brass lamp on it, and to her right in the far corner, 40 feet away, under a chandelier the size of a car, the Steinway lid down. Bench pushed in, Muse guest empty, one fingerprint on the fallboard where somebody had leaned. Her fingers moved, not much. A twitch at the second and third, the way they used to do under a desk during a lecture, running a passage on nothing. She put her hand in her pocket and made it stop. Good afternoon, the host said, in a voice that had already made its decision. Hi. Good afternoon. I'm here about the porter position. The postings said apply in person, so we're fully committed today. I'm not looking for a table, I understand. So you're not hiring. I said we're fully committed. Those are different sentences. His jaw moved. Somewhere behind her, a fork went down on a plate, and it was not loud. But the room had gotten quieter in the last 4 seconds, and everybody in it knew it. The host came around the stand. He lowered his voice into that register men use when they are being kind on purpose, so that you will have to be the one who isn't. Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what kind of establishment this is. I know what kind of establishment this is. There's a posting. Porter, dishwasher, prep. I've done all 3. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the McDonald's on 55th. There it was. He said it so pleasantly. That's the thing she would come back to later, at 3 in the morning on somebody's carpet, what? He said it the way you'd give directions to a tourist, genuinely helpful. 2 blocks down on your left. Imani did not move. I'd like to leave an application, she said. We're not accepting, then I'd like to speak to a manager. The manager is, I'll wait. Ma'am, I'll wait, she said again. And she did not raise her voice, and she did not move her feet. And something the way she stood there made the young man in the gray jacket glance sideways, fast toward the dining room, which is when a chair came back from a table with a sound like a small announcement. And now you know how she got there. Now you know why, when a man in a $4,000 suit pointed at a piano and offered her a hymn, a 21-year-old woman who had not touched a keyboard in 9 months said the name of the hardest 4.5 minutes in the entire piano repertoire. Here is what she expected to happen next. She expected him to blink. She expected the blank, pleasant nothing of a man hearing a foreign phone number read out loud. She expected, is that a song? She expected to get say the singing and watch him nod like he'd known all along, and she expected to take the 2 feet of ground that would give her and stand on it. That is not what happened. Hollis Prescott went still, not shocked, still, the way a man goes still when he hears his own name spoken in the next room. Winter wind, he said. Imani's mouth was already open for the next sentence. She closed it. That's the nickname, Hollis said. The A minor, not Chopin's. The publishers gave it that. A pause. 4 minutes. 4.5 if you're honest about the tempo. The room did not understand what was happening. The room heard a rich man knowing a fact, the way rich men know facts about wine. Imani understood exactly what was happening, and it went down both her arms like cold water. 4 bars of introduction, Hollis said. Lento. Just the melody. Right hand alone. Nothing underneath it. He turned his hand over. A small gesture. A wrist rate rolling. And then the whole thing falls off a cliff. Right hand runs 16ths, top to bottom, for 4 straight minutes. Left hand carries the tune underneath it, and it has to sing. Or you've got a typing exercise. Silence in the dining room. Total. The killer isn't the notes, Hollis said. It's the wrist. Minute 3. You lose the wrist, and the whole right hand goes to mush, and there is wire to hide because there is no rest in that piece. Not one. 4 minutes, and the right hand never stops moving. At table 4, the woman with the cold tea had put both hands flat on the tablecloth. Imani stared at him. You played, she said. Hollis's eyes came back into focus. I took lessons. That's not what I asked. It's what I'm answering. Something moved across his face and was gone. 2 seconds, maybe, not regret. Closer to a door being pulled quietly to. The smile came back on like a lamp. Age is 9 to 20, he said, to the room now, easy again, generous. My mother's idea. I was quite serious about it for a while. He turned his hands over and looked at them and put them back in his pockets. Which is precisely why it suggests something else, young lady. Sincerely, that piece has humiliated better people than either of us. And there it was, he'd known. He had stood in that dining room and offered a hymn to a homeless girl he had never met. And when she named the hardest thing in the repertoire, he had not been surprised for 1 single second, because he knew exactly what it was. He'd known when he pointed at the piano. He had known the whole time. That was the thing Imani would carry the longest. Not the McDonald's, not the laugh from the 2 tables, the fact that his cruelty was educated. Opus 25, number 11, she said. You're sure? I said it twice. 3rd time's a charm. You'll only need to hear it once. And she walked, 40 feet of marble and then carpet. It was a long way, and she had time to notice things she did not want to notice, the way you do. That her right sneaker made a sound the left one didn't. That a woman at table 12 had put her hand over her mouth. That the chandelier was full of dust on top, where nobody looks, because nobody is ever above a chandelier. That she was going to be sick, quick. Behind her, Hollis was still talking, following at a stroll, hands clasped behind his back, addressing the room like a man in a museum. Impromptu entertainment, he said. You never know what you'll get. A chair creaked. At the window table, the young woman from Ohio lifted her phone about 8 inches. Not to record, to check the time. That's what she told herself. Her aunt saved for months for that lunch, and was currently gripping her napkin in both hands. Somebody should say something, Wisna whispered. I know. Somebody should. I know. Neither of them said anything, and the young woman's thumb found the record button without asking her permission. The bench was pushed all the way in. Imani pulled it out, and the legs dragged on the carpet, and it was heavier than it should have been, and she thought, of course it is. Nobody moves it. She sat. Wrong height, too high. Factory setting, meant for a room and not a person. She reached underneath and found the knobs, and her hands knew where they were. That was the first thing that went through her. Not memory, exactly. Her fingers found 2 brass knobs under a bench she had never sat on in her life, because every bench is the same bench, and they turned counterclockwise twice each without being told. She sat again. Better. Feet flat. She slid the bench back 4 inches, put her right foot over the damper pedal and did not press it. Then she opened the fall board. The keys were immaculate. That was almost funny. Spotless. Polished. The naturals white as a magazine page. She held her hand 2 inches above them and could feel that the whole instrument was cold, not out of tune. Cold. A 9-foot Steinway that lived under a chandelier at 71 degrees and got dusted twice a week and had not had a serious pair of hands on it in 6 years. Hi, she thought, which was stupid. Now, she thought it anyway. Somewhere behind her, Hollis said, "Whenever you're ready, my lunch is getting cold." A laugh. 2 tables. Imani Stroud put her hands on the keys, and that is when she understood in one flat instant exactly how much trouble she was in, because her hands were freezing. She had been outside for 2 hours and 40 minutes in 51-degree October air with no gloves, and before that, she had been on her knees for 8 hours with a spray bottle. And her fingers had been going from hot water to cold air 14 times a night for 8 straight months. There were cracks at 3 knuckles that opened when she spread her hand. She had not touched a keyboard in 9 months, and nobody in that entire room, not one single person, was going to give her a warm-up. 4 bars, she thought. Lento. Just the melody. Get through 4 bars. She played the 4 bars. They were fine. Slow, bare, the right hand alone in the top of the instrument. And the room heard 4 notes of something and went quiet in a completely new way. And for about 3 seconds, Imani Stroud thought she was going to be all right. Then the piece falls off the cliff. Then the piece falls off the cliff. That is how it is built. 4 of almost nothing, and then the entire right hand drops into a chromatic avalanche and does not stop for 4 minutes. And the left hand has to come in underneath it, with the tune, strong, singing, like a man shouting over weather. Imani's right hand went in, and it went wrong. Not catastrophically, not at first. It smeared. The first descending run came out bunched at the top and thin at the bottom. Her 4th finger did not clear, and the whole line lost its edges. Fine. Fine. Recover it. The left hand came in half a beat behind. No. She pulled it back, got the octaves under it. And now she was thinking about the left hand, which meant she was not thinking about the right. The right hand in that piece cannot be left alone. Not for a bar, not for a beat. The next figure came apart in her fingers like wet paper. Wrong note. Audible. Then another one. Her thumb drags the black key and caught. Stop thinking. Stop thinking. Stop. Her forearm was seizing. 9 months of nothing and 8 months of scrubbing, and she could feel the muscle locking up like a fist closing. And she had never felt that before. Not once. Not in 15 years. She had been playing for 38 seconds. And somebody laughed. It was a small laugh. One man at a table near the bar, and it was not even cruel. It was embarrassed. It was the success a person makes when they are uncomfortable and do not know where to put it. But it landed in the middle of that silence like a plate going down. And then somebody else laughed. Imani heard it. Her hands were still moving. That was the horror. Her hands kept going another 2 bars on their own, mangling it. And she heard the whole thing from the outside, from across the room, the way you hear your own voice played back on a recording. She heard exactly what they were hearing. A homeless girl banging on a piano. She stopped. Both hands came off the keys. The sound surrounded for a second in a 9-foot soundboard, and then it died. And the room went quiet in the worst way it had gone quiet yet. Somebody exhaled through their nose. Somebody murmured something. And behind her, warm as a hand on the shoulder, Hollis Prescott said, "That's all right." 2 words into her back. "That's all right. Nobody's judging you." A pause, perfectly measured. "Gideon, let's get this young lady a sandwich. I think she's earned. I'm not finished." Imani did not turn around. She said it to the music desk quietly, and it carried anyway, because that room was so silent you could hear ice settle in a glass 3 tables away. "I'm sorry," Hollis said. "I said I'm not finished. You stopped. I stopped. I'm not finished. Those are 2 different things." She heard him take a breath to answer. She did not wait for it. She put her hands in her lap, palms down on her thighs, and she looked at them, and she made herself look at them. All of it, the whole ugly truth of them, which she had spent 9 months refusing to do. "These are my hands. These are the hands I have." She turned them over, and she thought about Otis Stroud in the alley behind the building on Lenox Road with his forearms black to the elbow, about a middle school band room with 40 dented instruments in it, and no window. About 29 years of a man showing up on a Monday to teach 12-year-olds to count to 4. She thought about a Baldwin upright, the color of strong coffee, about a middle C that ran a little bright, and she thought about the sound that piano made going around the second-floor landing. That low groan from inside the case, all those strings speaking at once. 9 months she had been running from that sound. You didn't kill her. You sold a piano to pay a bill. You did the arithmetic, and you paid what you could pay, and you walked out into January, and you kept going. That is not a sin. That is exactly what he taught you. Her hands had stopped shaking. She noticed it the way you notice rain stopping. She flexed her right hand once, opened it wide, a knuckle cracked, and the split skin stung, and she let it sting. Then she rolled her wrists. Slow, both directions. The way Dr. Odessa Bramblett had made her do at the start of every lesson for 2.5 years. 60 seconds, no exceptions. You don't drive a car out of a driveway at 50 miles an hour, Miss Stroud. She rolled them for a full minute. Nobody said one word. Not Hollis, not the host, not the man who had laughed. There is something about watching a person prepare, really prepare, unhurried, in front of everybody, with nothing to prove and nowhere to hide, that shuts a room up faster than anything else on earth. At table 4, an old woman with cold tea in front of her put her hand flat against her chest. Odessa Bramblett came to the Meridian on the second Tuesday of every month because her husband had proposed to her at that corner table in 1979, and she was not the kind of woman who stopped doing a thing because the reason for it had died. She had recognized the wrist rolls. She had taught them for 41 years. Imani lifted her hands, and she started over. From the top, 4 bars. Yet lento, the same 4 notes she had played 90 seconds earlier, except this time the groom was already listening. This time her arm was warm, and this time she was not playing to prove anything to a man in a charcoal suit. She was playing because it was in her. It had been in her the whole time. The cliff came, and she went off it clean. The right hand dropped into the avalanche, and it did not smear. Every note came off the front of the finger with an edge on it, and the sound that came out of that cold Steinway was so sudden and so bright that a waiter 20 feet away flinched. The left hand came in, and it sang. That is the whole test of that piece right there in the first 15 seconds. Anybody with enough hours can make the right hand move. The question is whether there is a human being underneath it, whether the melody comes up through all that noise like a voice through weather. Hers came up big, warm, a little rough at the edges from 3/4 of a year of silence, and unmistakably a person. The murmuring died, all of it, at once. A woman at table 12 set down a fork she had been holding for 2 minutes without knowing she was holding it. In the kitchen, a line cook heard something come through the swinging doors and stopped mid-plate and said, "What is that?" and pulled off his gloves and walked out into the dining room in a stained apron. Nobody stopped him. Behind him came the pastry chef, then the dishwasher, still wet to the elbow, then a runner with a tray in her hands and no idea what to do with it. A dozen splape from the back of the house came out and stood in a row along the wall by the service station. Nobody sent them back. Gideon Pyle stood in the middle of the floor with his hands at his sides and did not send them back. Hollis Prescott had not moved. He was standing 8 feet from the piano with his hands behind his back and his chin slightly lifted. And he had arranged his face into an expression of tolerant amusement about 40 seconds earlier, and now it was stuck there. He knew what he was hearing. That was the problem. A man who knew nothing could have stood there comfortably. A man who knew nothing could have thought, well, she's loud. Hollis Prescott had played that piece. He had worked on it for the better part of a year when he was 19 years old, in a studio on the 4th floor of a building on West 65th Street, with a woman standing behind his left shoulder saying again and again and again. He never got past minute 3. Not once in all that time did he get the right hand through minute 3 without the wrist collapsing on. And a 21-year-old woman who had slept in a shelter on Bushwick Avenue the night before was doing it right now, with cracked knuckles, in the wrong shoes, having started over in front of 40 strangers. Something in his chest turned over. He put it down fast. He had 30 years of practice putting things down fast, but it turned over. At table 4, Odessa Bramblett had gone very still. At first, it was only the sound, the clarity of it, the size of that left hand. She had heard a great many young people play a great many notes in her life, and she had learned to wait a long time before allowing herself to feel anything. Then came the return of the second theme, and she stopped waiting. The girl did something. with it. Right at the return, where every recording on Earth pushes forward, where every composite kid on the planet leans into the tempo because it is exciting, and because it feels wonderful under the hand, the girl pulled back. Not much. A hair, half a breath. She let the left hand arrive 1 instant late, so that the melody landed just behind the storm instead of on top of it, so that the tune sounded like something being held onto rather than something being announced. Odessa's hand came up to her mouth. That's mine. She had built that. She had argued for it in front of a doctoral committee in 1988 and lost, and she had taught it anyway for 30 years afterward. The wind does not wait for you, Miss Stroud. You come in behind it. You come in like a woman walking against it. Odessa lowered her hand and stared at the young woman's back, at the shoulders, at the shape of the head, and something enormous began to move up out of her memory. Braids then, now 15 pounds heavier than 17 years old, 18. Oh my God, that's Otis and Verna's girl. She had been at that child's mother's funeral. She had sat in the 4th row at Greater Bethel on a Saturday in August. And afterward, she had written a note on her own stationery with her phone number in it and pressed it into that child's hand and said, "You call me. I mean it. You call me." And the girl had said, "Yes, ma'am," and never called. Odessa Bramblett, 70 years old, sat in a 5-star dining room with both hands flat on a tablecloth and began to cry without making any sound at all. Minute 3 came. Imani felt it coming the way you feel a hill in a car. The right hand had been moving for 2.5 minutes without a single rest, and her forearm was starting to talk to her, that deep ache behind the bone, and this was the place. This was where the wrist goes. This was where 100,000 students have arrived and had the whole thing turned to mush underneath them. Drop the elbow. Let the arm carry it. Don't grip. Breathe, she breathed. And she came up over the hill and down the other side, and the notes kept their edges. And the left hand kept singing, and something in that room changed temperature. At the window table, a phone was propped against a water glass now. Marley Aiken was 24 years old and worked in accounts receivable at a dental supply company in Columbus. And she was in New York for 4 days with an aunt who had saved for months for that lunch. And she was not recording anymore. She was live, 900 people. Then 2,000, then 6. She should not set a word into it. She had started to, twice, and stopped both times, because what was going to come out of her mouth was you guys, and it felt obscene. So she held the frame steady and let it run. Her aunt was crying into a napkin beside her. Across the room, at table 9, a freelance reporter had turned to a clean page and was Radsbazier, say, in the shorthand she had built over a dozen years of covering hearings and council meetings, and once, memorably, a hurricane. 10-1 against any critic in this room, Corinne Docherty wrote. 3rd year, conservatory minimum. Then, no, higher. Then she stopped writing altogether and just watched, which she had not done at work in 6 years. The last page of that piece does not end. It detonates. 4 minutes of storm, and then the whole thing gathers itself up and runs straight on a keyboard, both hands, top to bottom, and slams 2 chords at the very bottom of the instrument. Imani hit them. The room shook. Actually shook. The crystal chandelier moved and made a sound like small bells. Then it was over, and the silence afterward was not the same silence as before. She sat with her hands still on the keys, and her head down and her breath going in and out through her mouth. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. For one whole second there was nothing in the world but a 9-foot soundboard letting go of it. Nobody clapped. Nobody could. Then a chair went over backward. Odessa Bramblett was on her feet with both hands up over her head, and she was clapping like a woman at a revival, hard, up high, and she was something that was not words. And the room came apart. They stood up, all of them. 40-some people in a midtown dining room stood up at 1:15 on a Tuesday afternoon and made a noise that does not happen in restaurants. The kitchen staff along the wall were yelling. The line cook had both fists in the air. The runner was crying into her tray. A man at the back was pounding his table with the flat of his hand and shaking his head over and over, like he was arguing with somebody who was not there. Imani turned around on the bench, and she looked at them, and she did not understand what she was looking at. That is the 4 seconds. That is the clip that would end up on every screen in the country. A young woman turning around on a piano bench with her mouth slightly open, and her eyes going across a room full of standing strangers, completely bewildered, like a person who has walked out of a dark theater into daylight. She had come in for a dishwashing job. Gideon Pyle got there first. He crossed the floor fast and walked crouched down beside the bench so that he was not looking down at her. Ma'am, miss, what's your name? Imani? Imani? Okay. Are you all right? When did you last eat? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. This morning. What time this morning? A pause. Okay. He stood up. Okay. Anything she wants. Right now. And bring a chair. She's not sitting on that bench for this. Odessa Bramblett was coming across the dining room at a speed that alarmed the people around her, one hand out in front of her. She reached the piano and took Imani's hands in both of hers and turned them palm up. Verna's baby, she said. Imani's whole face broke. Dr. Bramblett, don't you Dr. Bramblett me? The old woman's voice came apart in the middle. 9 months. 9 months. And I have called that number. It got shut off. I went to the apartment. We lost the apartment. I know you lost the apartment. I stood in that hallway and talked to a man who had never heard your name. She was still holding on. She turned the left hand over and looked at the base of the palm, at the thick flat callus there, in a place where no pianist on earth has a callus. And she made a small sound like she had been struck. What is that? Mop handle. Odessa closed her eyes. Baby, it still works. I heard it work. And Imani Stroud, who had not cried in front of another human being since a Saturday in August, put her forehead down on that old woman's shoulder in the middle of a 5-star dining room, in front of 40 strangers and several thousand people on a live stream she did not know existed and came apart. Which brings us to Hollis Prescott. He had been standing 8 feet away through all of it. Nobody had looked at him in 4 minutes. That had not happened to him in a room since 1994. What the country assumed happened next is the thing that happens in the story everybody already knows. The rich man is humbled. He goes red. He stammers out an apology and gets walked to the door, and the room boos him out, and justice arrives before the check does. That is not what happened. Hollis Prescott took out his wallet. He did it calmly, in full view, with the applause still coming down. He opened it and counted out bills, hundreds. He counted 10 of them. Then he walked to the piano and laid them on the closed lid in a neat fan and smoothed them once with 2 fingers. The applause fell off a cliff. A deal's a deal, Hollis said. Imani lifted her head off Odessa's shoulder. I said if you slayed something worth hearing, you'd eat. He gestured at the money. That is a great deal of eating, and I would say you have made your point. He turned to the room. She's extraordinary, he said, truly. I would like to be the first person to say so. Somebody said, are you kidding me? Hollis kept going, and I would point out, he said, that not one of us would know it. Would we, if nobody had asked her to play? The room did not know what to do with that. It was obscene, and for one queasy second, a very small number of people in it thought. Imani stood up. She was 5'6" and 21 years old and had been awake since 1:30 that morning, and she walked over to that piano lid and looked down at 1,000 Salzan cash fanned out like a hand of cards. $1,000. She did the math without meaning to. She always did the math. 0.47%. She picked the money up. The room held its breath, and she held it out to Hollis Prescott, folded once in one hand. No, thank you. Good to be foolish. I asked for a job. This is better than a job is not remotely better than a job. It's $1,000. It's a tip, Imani said. I didn't audition. You didn't hire me. You bet a hungry person that she couldn't do something, and then you paid off the bet. Her voice was shaking, and she did not stop. That's not a wage. There's no shift attached to it. There's no next week attached to it. Tomorrow, I still don't have a job. Then take it and buy yourself a week. And then what? I'm sorry? Then what? She said. Then it's next Tuesday, and I'm in the same doorway, and you're at the same table. The only difference is that you get to feel like a good man for a year. Nobody breathed. Hollis Prescott's jaw set, and he said the thing that finished him. He said it without raising his voice, in a tone of purest reasonableness, which how those things always get said. I gave you exactly what I promised, in front of everyone. I don't know what else you people want. Marley Aiken's phone was 18 inches from his mouth. 19,000 people were watching it live. Gideon Pyle stepped forward. 12 years he had run that room. Mr. Prescott, I'd like to ask you to leave. The room made a sound. Somebody said yes. Somebody clapped once. And Hollis Prescott turned to look at him, and he said he was almost chill about it. Gideon, whose name is on your lease? Silence. I'll wait, Hollis said. Gideon did not answer. He did not have to. Every person in that dining room watched a 45-year-old man in a good suit stand absolutely still, and say nothing. And they watched his he did it, and they understood. Prescott Hospitality Group had bought that building in 2011. The restaurant was a tenant. Gideon Pyle could no more throw Hollis Prescott out of that dining room than he could throw him out of his own living room. "Right," Hollis said. He put his wallet away. He picked his coat up off the back of his chair and took his time about it. And on the way past the piano, he paused and said quietly to Imani alone, "You came in behind the beat at the return. Nobody does that." She stared at him. "Bramblett's fingering," he said, and he walked out. Ellis Prescott followed his father toward the door. He got 4 steps, then he stopped and stood in the middle of the aisle in a room where every person was looking at him, 27 years old, hands half raised, caught between a door and a piano. He would tell 3 different people over the following months that he had been about to say something. He had not been about to say anything. He went out the door. Imani Stroud left the Meridian Grand at 10 minutes to 2 with a to-go container she had not asked for, a business card from Odessa Bramblett with a new number written on the back in ballpoint, and a job application that Gideon Pyle filled out for himself, standing up, using the host stand as a desk. He wrote a variable immediately across the top and underlined it twice. She said thank you 9 times on her way to the door. She walked to the subway. She got on the L train. She fell asleep against the window, somewhere around 6th Avenue, and woke with her cheek stuck to the glass. For about 9 hours, she genuinely believed that something good had happened to her. By 8 o'clock that night, the live stream had 400,000 views. By midnight, the clip was on every platform there is. The good version ran 51 seconds. The restart, the last page, the 2 chords, the turn on the bench. The other version ran 9. I don't know what else you people want. By Wednesday morning, there was a hashtag. By Wednesday afternoon, Hollis Prescott was on the front of 2 websites with 100 million monthly readers. A woman in Michigan found the name of the restaurant. A man in Texas found the name of the building. And by Wednesday night, somebody had found the name of the shelter on Bushwick Avenue. That is where it stopped being a nice story. The shelter was a converted Catholic school with 61 beds for women. It ran on a city contract, an annual budget of about $2 million, and a director who had been doing that work for 22 years and had developed in that time an almost supernatural ability to smell trouble coming down the avenue. She smelled it Thursday at 20 to 7 when there were 2 vans on the sidewalk. By Friday, there were 9. 9 vans, plus freelancers, plus a man with a gimbal, plus 2 people who were not press at all and would not say what they were. All of them standing on a public sidewalk outside a building whose entire operating principle was that nobody knows you are inside it. 61 women lived there. A number of them were hiding. That is not a figure of speech. Some had orders of protection. Some had left a man in another state in the middle of the night with a garbage bag. Some had a court date and a caseworker and a placement hearing. And if the wrong face got onto the wrong camera, all of it came down. Friday morning, a resident could not get out the front door to make a 7 o'clock shift because a man with a boom microphone asked her 4 times whether she was the piano girl. She was written up at work. Friday afternoon, a resident who was 68 years old went out the side door and did not come back for 3 days. The director called Imani into the office at 4. There was a photograph of grandchildren on the wall and a coffee mug on the desk that said, "World's Okaik's boss." And she was crying before she started talking, which Imani had never seen in 5 months. "I want to say something first," she said. "I want you to hear this part first, and I want you to hold on to it." "Okay, you did nothing wrong." Imani's stomach dropped. "You did not do one thing wrong. You went and asked man for a job. That is all you did. Do you hear me?" I hear you. I have 61 women in this building. I know. One of them went out Wednesday, and she has not come back, and I do not know where she is. I know. There's a woman on the 3rd floor who has not been outside since Tuesday because her ex-husband's sister's for in Hartford." Imani nodded. She kept nodding. She could not make herself stop. "I can't make them leave," the director said. "The sidewalk is public. I have called the precinct 4 times. They are not doing anything illegal. So they leave when I leave." The director put both hands over her face. "I have fought for people in this office for 22 years, and I have never once had to do this, and I want you to know that I hate it. I hate it. It's all right. It is not all right. I'll get my bin," Imani said. She was out by 6. The director drove her personally to a facility in East New York with beds open one that morning and hugged her in the parking lot for a long time and pushed $40 out of her own wallet into Imani's hand, which Imani refused 3 times and finally took. The facility in East New York was full by the time they got there. Somebody had come in at 5:30. That is how it works. That is nobody's fault. There are 9 beds and there are 14 women, and the clock is the clock. The director made calls from the car for an hour and 40 minutes. Imani sat in the passenger seat with the bin on her lap and watched a woman with a lanyard and cold cup of coffee fight the entire city of New York on her behalf from a Honda Civic in a parking lot. And at 10 to 8, the director hung up the phone and put her head against the steering wheel. "There's a place in Jamaica," she said. "It's not the same kind of place, Imani. It's fine." "It is not fine." "You have to go back," Imani said. "There's 60 women waiting on you." The job went on Monday. That one took 9 minutes and happened over the phone with a woman from the staffing agency who had never met her and read most of it off of a screen. So this is not a performance issue. I want to be clear about that. Your evaluations are excellent. Okay, the client has asked that you not be scheduled at that site going forward. Which client? Harmon, a pause. Why? They've subsided an image concern. Imani stood on a sidewalk on Jamaica Avenue with a phone against her ear. An image concern. That's the language I have. I clean floors at 3 in the morning. Nobody has ever seen me. There is not one person in that building who has ever seen my face. I understand. Whose image? I'm not able to speak to that. Imani closed her eyes. Prescott Hospitality Group did not own Harmon Tower. They did not have to. They co-owned a management company with a firm that held the service contract on a dozen commercial buildings in Lower Manhattan. And somewhere in a room she would never see, a man who had never heard her name said something to another man who had never heard her name. It was not illegal. There was no memo. Nobody could ever prove it. 8 months of night shifts ended in 9 minutes on a sidewalk in Queens. "Can I ask you something?" Imani said. "Yes. Am I on some kind of list?" The woman did not answer, which was the answer. The money came the following Tuesday. Somebody had started a fundraiser the day after the video went up. Not Marley. Marley had actually refused, twice, publicly, and said the only thing she wanted was for people to leave the girl alone. It was a stranger in San Diego. Well-meaning, completely, genuinely well-meaning, $9,000 in a day. 40 by Friday, $91,416 by the following Tuesday. Imani found out from a text message and had to sit down on a bus stop bench. $91,000 is not a number. $91,000 is an apartment with a lease and a security deposit. It is a year of tuition at Halloran with change left over. It is a used upright and a moving truck and first and last on a 1-bedroom in Bed-Stuy and a winter coat. It is a life. The organizer transfers it in one lump to an account in her name on Tuesday afternoon and sent a message with 9 exclamation points. And Imani sat in a McDonald's on Jamaica Avenue and refreshed her banking app for 2 hours just to look at it. $91,416. By Wednesday morning, it was gone. $311 left, which is the exempt amount the law lets them leave you. She thought it was fraud. She stood in a bank branch on Sutphin Boulevard for 50 minutes, and then a manager took her into a side room and turned a monitor around on the desks so she could see it herself. A restraining notice, a file number, a date, Rockridge Portfolio Recovery LLC. Vani Stroud Imani T. Default Judgment, entered in June, $211,480 in principal, plus fees, percent statutory interest running from the date of assignment. Default, meaning she never showed up, meaning she had been served, legally and properly at her last known address, and then again by mail. And she had never responded, and after 30 days a court gave the collector everything it asked for without a hearing. Which is what happens in the overwhelming majority of these cases. Every single day, in every county in America. Imani sat in that side room and looked at a screen, and she thought about a manila envelope. A manila envelope in a plastic bin on a numbered shelf in a converted Catholic school on Bushwick Avenue, the one she never opened. She had looked at it every year for 5 months, so she did the inventory. She had touched it, and every single morning she had thought, I know what that is. And there is nothing I can do about it, and if I open it, I will not be able to get up off this floor. So she did not open it, and the clock ran. The day the money hit her account, An automated system at debt buyer's offices in Delaware matched a name to a levy, and a bank in Queens froze it inside 18 hours. There was no villain in that either. Nobody laughed. Nobody at Rockridge Portfolio Recovery has ever heard of a piano. The bank manager was a woman in her 50s who kept saying, "I'm so sorry, baby. Can I get any of it back?" You'd need a lawyer. You'd need to move to vacate the judgment. And honey, that's a whole thing. How much of a thing? It's a lawyer. Imani laughed. She laughed out loud in the side room of a bank branch, and it scared the manager a little. So the money to hire the lawyer, Imani said, is the money they took. Here is where the story sat, 16 days after the Meridian Grand. 12 million people had watched Imsani Stroud play Chopin. She had a hashtag. She had 409 emails in an account she could not check because she no longer had a phone plan. She had 2 record labels, a talent agency, 6 podcasts, a morning show, and a man in Los Angeles who wanted to option her life rights for a figure with a comma in it and had not yet responded to a request to put that in writing. She had also, in those 16 days, lost her bed, lost her job, lost her borough, and lost $91,000 she never touched. Her total assets were $311, a backpack and a plastic bin. She was hungrier than she had been before she played, and the debt, the actual debt, the reason for all of it, was now larger than it had been on the morning she walked into that restaurant, because the interest had stopped for 1 second the entire time. Cordell Vance found her on a Thursday. It took him 9 days, and he did it the only way a man like Cordell Vance can do anything, which is by going places and asking people. He went to Bushwick Avenue. He talked to the director for 40 minutes, and she told him nothing, because that is her job. And then she walked him to the door and said one word, Jamaica, and closed it. He drove out to Queens 4 mornings in a row after his shift ended, at 7 in the morning, in a 19-year-old Buick. He found her on the 5th morning sitting on a bench outside a library that did not open until 10. He did not say anything at first. He sat down at the other end of the bench. "You look terrible, thank you. You eating?" "What'd you eat?" She looked at him, and whatever was on her face made the old man's chin come up and his mouth go flat, and he looked out at the street for a while. "I got fired," she said. "I know, I raised hell. Don't do that. Too late." He shrugged. "They put a letter in my file. I'm 63 years old, Imani. What are they going to do, make me clean floors?" She laughed. It hurt her chest. "My wife died in 2019, Cordell said. Imani stopped laughing. "So there's no wife making sandwiches. I figure you knew that." "I knew that. I figure." He nodded slowly. "I make them at 9 at night before my shift. Cut the crusts off because Ruthie couldn't stand crusts and I never got out of the habit." He looked at his hands. "Turns out a man can only eat so many sandwiches." A city bus pulled up across the street and let 3 people off. "I got a house in Cambria Heights," Cordell said. 3 bedrooms. My daughter's in Atlanta. My son's in the Air Force. And I have got 2 rooms in that house with nothing in them but boxes of a dead woman's clothes that I cannot make myself take to the church." "Cordell, I'm not finished." Imani closed her mouth. "Now, I know what you're fixing to say, because I have known you 8 months in Durt's, and you are the proudest person I have ever met in my life, and I include my mother in that. And my mother once walked home from a hospital in the snow, rather than take a ride from a man she did not care for. I can't. You can. You just don't want to. It's not the same thing. No, it isn't." He turned and looked at her straight on for the first time. "Because I am not offering you charity, and I am not offering you a favor, and do not insult me by calling it one. I'm 63, my back is finished, and my basement has got 900 pounds of my wife's things in it that I have not been able to walk down there and touch in 4 years. He put his hands on his knees. "You come stay in Ruthie's sewing room, and you help me clear that basement. That's the deal. That is a job, and it is work, and it is honest. And if you want, I will write it out on a piece of paper, and we will both sign it." Imi sat on a bench outside a library in Jamaica, Queens, with her mouth open and nothing coming out of it. "Now say yes," Cordell said, "before I get emotional in public," which I do not do. She said yes. The sewing room had a twin bed in it and a window facing a maple tree and a light switch that did not work. And Cord fixed the light switch that afternoon, standing on a kitchen chair, talking the entire time. 2 blocks over there was a church. Mount Carmel Baptist, where Cordell had ushered for 31 years, and which had in its fellowship hall a Yamaha upright from 1974 with a chipped E above middle C and a steep B flat and an action that fought you all the way down. He put a key to the side door on the kitchen table on the third night. He did not make a speech about it. He did not say a word. He set it down and went to work. Amante looked at that key for 2 days. On the third day, she walked 2 blocks in the cold and let herself into a dark fellowship hall at 8:15 in the morning and sat down at a piano worth maybe $400 and played for 6 hours. Her arms shook. She cried twice. She stayed. Corinne Doherty tracked her down in the middle of November. She did it the honest way. She wrote a letter, an actual letter on paper, and gave it to Odessa Bramblett. And Odessa gave it to Cordell, and Cordell read it himself first, twice, before he handed it over. They met at a diner on Linden Boulevard on a Tuesday. Corinne was 36 and had been freelancing for a dozen years and had a folder in front of her that was 2 inches thick, and she did not touch it for the first 20 minutes. She ordered eggs. She asked about the church piano. She let it be a conversation. Then she said, "Can I show you something?" "Okay. I want to warn you first, you're not going to like it." "That's all right, I've had a month." Corinne opened the folder. After the video, she said, "You had offers, a lot of them. I want to walk you through 4. She laid out a page. Hallerson Conservatory, full reinstatement, tuition and fees, plus a living stipend. Announced November 2nd. Funded out of an endowed emergency scholarship that was established on October 29th. She looked up, which is 11 days after the restaurant. Second page. Fellowship at a chamber series in Westchester. Housing included. Brand new this year. Third page. A recording contract from a small classical label out of Chicago. Good label, real people. They received an anonymous underwriting commitment in October to cover production costs for a debut album by an artist to be named. Fourth page. And a booking. Lincoln Center. A recital debut, which for unsigned 21-year-old with no competition history and no degree is not a thing that happens. She put her pen down, and I want to be careful here, because you could sell that hall out tomorrow. You could sell it out twice. Somebody still had to place the call. Imani looked at the 4 pages lying on the formica. "They're all the same," she said. "They're all the same." Corinne slid out the last sheet, a grant approval summary, 4 lines of budget code, and a signature block. Prescott Family Station of Pride, and a signature, not Hollis. Ellis Prescott, Executive Director. The diner was loud. Somebody's plate went down behind the counter. A man on a stool laughed at something on his phone. He signed everyone, Corinne said. Different intermediaries. 3 fiscal sponsors, a donor-advised fund, and 1 anonymous gift. It took me 9 days and a records request to line them up. There is nothing illegal on this table, and I'll be honest with you. Most reporters would not have found it, and most would not have bothered. Amani did not move. "Every good thing that's happened to me since October," she said. "Yes. Every single one. Yes. Does the school know? No. And the label doesn't. And the hall doesn't. They think they discovered you." Corinne closed the folder. "That's the design." Imani sat back against the vinyl. She thought about a manila envelope in a plastic bin. She thought about $91,000. She thought about a man in a charcoal suit feeding $100 bills across a piano lid and smoothing them flat with 2 fingers, and saying a deal's a deal, and walking past her, close enough that she could smell his coat. Bramblett's fingering, he had said. And sitting in a diner on Linden Boulevard with cold eggs in front of her, she understood that the man had not been trying to get away with it. He had been trying to be thorough. A story like hers does not go away. It gets bought. "What do you want?" and said. Amani looked up, and Corinne Doherty, who had covered 2 mayors and a hurricane, went home that night and wrote 1 sentence in her notebook and underlined it, because in a dozen she had never seen anything come into a person's face the way it came into that young woman's face across a diner table. "I want to meet the sun," Imani said. Room B smelled like floor wax and burned coffee, and it had a Wurlitzer spinet shoved against the wall with 4 dead keys in the top octave. Imani had learned to work around them the way you work around a bad step in a staircase. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 9, 9 students, all of them adults. On the Thursday before Thanksgiving, a young man in a blue jacket came in at 10 to 7 and sat down at the back without saying anything. 27 years old, his father's jaw and none. But the rest of it, Imani, she'd not stopped the lesson. Dolores was 59 and cleaned a nursing home on Merrick Boulevard and came straight to room B in her scrubs. Again, Imani said, and don't look at your hands. I have to look at my hands. Look at the wall. Dolores looked at the wall, played 8 bars, stopped. That's further than Tuesday. That is not further. That's 2 bars further, and you know it is. At 9:03, Imani wrote out a receipt from a carbon book, tore it along the perforation, and handed it over. The room emptied. Ellis Prescott stood up. Sit down, Imani said. Not back there. Up front where I can see you. He came up front. Did you sign the grants? Yes. All 4. 6 she sat back. Who told you to? My father, October 22nd, 4 days after. What did he say? And here is where Ellis Prescott did the one thing that made her decide not to take him apart. He told the truth. He had it laid out in 4 columns, he said. Exposure, duration, cost, remedy, columns. He'd had the firm running. There's a model for how long a thing like that stays as a news cycle and what it costs if it attaches to a name. They gave him 18 months. So he bought me a scholarship. He bought the ending. Ellis looked at the floor. He said, right now the story ends with a girl on a sidewalk. That's the versions with Lisks. If it ends with her at Lincoln Center, it's a feel-good story, and feel-good stories die in 6 weeks. The radiator knocked twice. He said the country doesn't want justice, Ellis said. He said the country wants an ending. Is he sorry? And Ellis looked her in the face for the first time. No. She let that sit. He's not gloating either, he said. He hasn't slept right since October. He watches the clip. I've seen him watch it in the back of a car. That isn't sorry. No, it isn't. He shook his head. He said something driving back that day. Out of nowhere, he said she came in behind the beat. Imani's hand went still. And then about a mile later, he said, nobody teaches that anymore. Anymore, as she said. That's what he said. She stood up so fast the bench scraped. Odessa Bramblett made tea before she would say anything, which took 12 minutes. Imani stood at the window the whole time. You want to ask me about Hollis Prescott? You taught him. I taught him. 1985. He was 18, and he arrived at my door with his mother, who did all the talking, and a scarf. A scarf. He thought that was what musicians wore. Her mouth twitched, then went flat. He was ridiculous, and he was not untalented, and I want that said first, because it to everything after. How long did you have him? 2 years and 3 months. What happened? Odessa looked at the window a while. I was 30, she said. Hold on to that. 30 years old, second black woman ever hired onto that faculty, and in my first week at department chair told me I'd need to be twice as clear as anybody else about my standards. Because if I was ever soft on a student, somebody would say it was because I couldn't tell the difference. Imani sat very still. So I was clear, Odessa said. God help me, I was so clear. She put both hands around the cup. He wanted the A minor. 25-11. He'd wanted it since he was 15. I told him no for a year, and then I let him have it, and he worked on it for most of a year after that. He never got past minute 3. He never got past minute 3. His hands were the wrong hands. Short 5th finger, stiff bridge, a wrist that locked under load. She set the cup down, and there are things a person can build and things a person can only work around. That piece finds you out. It was written to find you out. So see quit. He came in on a Tuesday in December of 1987 and played it all the way through, badly. And he sat there with his back to me and said, tell me the truth. The radiator ticked. And I told him the truth. I said, you will never have a solo career. Imani closed her eyes. 9 words, Odessa said. And then I said the second thing, which was worse. I said, you are a hard-working young man with a small gift. And there is no shame in that. And you should give some thought to what else you might do. A small gift. A small gift at 20. At 20, her chin came up. I have taught 41 years since, and I have never said it that way again to a living soul. And there has not been 1 week since 1987 that I have not thought about it. And I'm not asking you to feel sorry for him, and I'm certainly not asking you to feel so sorry for me. Then why tell me? Because you're about to go stand in front of that man, and I don't want you walking in half-blind. What did he do? He got up, put his music in his bag, said, thank you. She stopped. He shook my hand. That's never gotten past. 20 years old, and somebody had raised him well enough that he shook the hand of the woman who had just taken the only thing he wanted. She smoothed her skirt. He withdrew that Friday. I didn't see his face again until I read his name in a newspaper 11 years later, 240 hotels, and Imaz understood the shape of it all at once. A boy is told his gift is small. So he spends 40 years building a world where gifts are small, where the only thing that counts is what a man can buy and put his name on the side of, where a girl in worn sneakers who says she can play is about to find out exactly what he found out. He didn't set me up to prove I couldn't play, she said slowly. He set up so he could watch it happen to somebody else. Yes, he picked the piece because it's the piece that broke him. He picked that piece, Odessa said, because for 40 years he has needed it to be unplayable. Amani looked down at her hands, the split knuckle, the flat callus at the base of the left palm. And I played it. You played it, said Odessa Bramblett, with a mop callus on your left hand, on a cold instrument having started over in front of him, with my fingering. She took Amani by the wrist. Baby, you didn't humiliate that man. You resurrected the worst day of his life and made him stand in the middle of it. At 4 in the morning, she came down and found Cordell at the kitchen table in his work clothes. I found out why he did it, she said. Somebody told him he wasn't good enough. He built a hotel company out of it. Cordell chewed. So what, he said. I'm telling you why. I heard you, and I'm asking what it's got to do with you standing in a doorway on 57th Street asking a man for a dish job. It explains. It explains him. He set the spoon down. It don't explain you. And I want you careful right now, because I've watched a lot of people get handed the reason somebody hurt them. And about half of them pick it up and carry it. It's heavy, and it ain't theirs. She sat with that. You already got one bill you're paying that isn't yours, as he said. That was the moment she knew what she was going to do. He picked a library. She thought about that the whole train ride in. Second floor, East 58th Street. A long oak table under the window. No coat, no phone, nobody with him. He looked older than he had in Apocalypse. You went to Bramblett. Yes. Did she tell you the version where she's sorry or the version where she was right? Both. That's her. He turned his hands over. She was right about my hands. That's not the part. What's the part? He looked out at the street. The part is that she told me on a Tuesday, and I'd been telling people I was going to be a concert pianist since I was 9 years old. My mother had told her sisters. There was a piano in the front room of our house that was in that room because of me. And you went home, and I had to walk in the door. Imani let it sit. I'm returning all of it, she said. All 6. The school already knows. I wrote the dean myself and didn't tell her where the money came from, because it isn't her business and it would embarrass people who did nothing wrong. You need that scholarship. I know. You have $300, $900 now. I've been teaching. Adults, $18 a lesson. He stared at her. $18. Against $211,000. Yes, that's not a plan. That's a gesture. It's neither, she said. It's a Tuesday. He sat back. Why, he said, and he wasn't being cruel. That was what she noticed. For the first time in either of theirs lives, the man was actually asking her a question. Because it ends the story, she said. He went still. That's what you wanted. An ending. Girl gets discovered. Girl goes to Lincoln Center. Everybody cries, and in 6 weeks, it's gone, and so am I. Ellis talks too much. Ellis told the truth, which is more than his father's ever done. She held his eyes. If I take your money, then everything I've ever do is the last chapter of a story about you. I don't get to be a pianist. I get to be the ending. I get to be the part where the rich man turns out to be complicated. That's not. It's exactly that. You didn't buy me a scholarship. You bought yourself a way to be forgiven without ever asking. The woman 4 tables down turned a page of her crossword. You know I could keep giving it away, he said, anonymously, through people you'd never trace. I know. Then what are you doing here? She took out a folded sheet of paper and put it between them. I'm going to ask you for one thing, and I'll be honest first, because you're about to look for the leverage and there isn't any. Corinne Docherty publishes in March. All of it. It happens whether you say yes or no. I can't stop it, and I wouldn't. You're telling me you have nothing. I can't hurt you, and I can't help you. If you say no, I'll go home, and it'll cost you 0. Then why would I say yes? That, she said, is the only interesting question in this building. She unfolded the paper. 11 middle schools in this city had a music program in 2009 and don't have one now. My father taught at one of them for 29 years, band. 40 dented instruments in a room with no window. He didn't move. $190,000 a year put us a program back into one building. Salary, instruments, repair, sheet music, and a tuner twice a year, which everybody forgets. 4 years, because anything less is a photo opportunity. 4 years means a kid who starts in 6th grade finishes. She turned the paper around. 4 schools, A little over 3 million. You spend more than that every year having your name put on the sides of things is. And the condition. Your name is not on any of it. Not the building, not the program, not the letterhead. No press release, no plaque, no scholarship named for your mother. Nobody at those 4 schools ever learns where it came from. If it leaks, it stops. And what do I get? She looked at him. Nothing. That's the entire idea. He was quiet a long time. That's not how any of this works. Foundations get credit. There's a reason it's called a blood gift, Miss Stroud. A gift has a gift zabiver. Then don't do it. I'm explaining something. You're negotiating. She stood and picked up her backpack. And I said at the start I wasn't going to. Sit down. No, there's a bus at 11:40, and if I miss it, I don't teach at 4. And there's a woman named Dolores who's been working on the same 12 bars since November, and she's nearly through them. She pushed the chair in. You said something to me in that restaurant, on your way out. You said nobody comes in behind the beat. Nobody does. Somebody taught me. That's all it is. That's the whole miracle the country's been crying about since October. Somebody sat behind my left shoulder for 2.5 years and made me do it 1,000 times. And most of those times, I got it wrong. She set the paper down in front of him, and she taught you too. That's what I can't get past. Same woman. Same fingering. She shouldered her bag. She's 70. 3rd floor, no elevator. She takes 2 students a week because she can't stand to take none. She looked at him one more time. You're the only man in New York who can afford to fix what happened to you. And you've spent 4 months trying to do it by fixing me. I'm not the one that's broken, Mr. Prescott. I never was. I just needed a job. She made the 11:40 bus. The winter would have been almost unbearable to live in Seaside, and it's very simple so to its practiced. 8:15 until 2 in the Fellowship Hall at Mount Carmel on a 1974 Yamaha with a chipped E and a sticky B flat. Coat on, because the heat didn't come up until 11. 281 mornings, December to September, on a $400 piano. 12 million people had watched 4.5 minutes in a restaurant. And not one of them watched a single one of those mornings, and the mornings were the whole of it. The mop callus took 5 months to go. Forearms from strength came back first, and fine control came back last, which was the opposite of what she expected. The rest happened in the gaps, the way real life does. A legal aid clinic took the case in January. The argument was boring, the way the real ones are. The default judgment had been entered on service made at an apartment she'd lost the previous February. Improper service. A judge in Kansas County vacated it on the 11th of March. And the account unfroze at 20 to 10 on a Thursday, while she was standing in the hallway outside room B, and she had to put a hand flat against the wall. Then the larger thing. The clinic pulled the hospital's charity care policy, which every nonprofit hospital in the state is required to have and required to screen for. Imani had never been screened. Nobody had asked her one question about income. She'd been 20 years old. Her father was dying down the hall. And a woman had slid a clipboard across a counter at 2 in the morning and said just here, an initial there. She had qualified the entire time. She had qualified on the night she signed. What was left was $19,840. Ambulance, out-of-network anesthesia. She could have written a check that afternoon. There was $91,000 in the account. She didn't. She made a schedule at Cordell's kitchen table and paid it at $440 a month out of what she earned at $18 an hour in room B, and kept every receipt in a carbon book in a kitchen drawer. Corinne asked her about it twice. People are going to say that's irrational. It is irrational. Then why? Because that came from strangers who felt something on the internet, Imani said. And this bill came from 11 days when my father was alive. Those aren't the same kind of money, and I'm not going to mix them. The rest went 3 places. $30,000 for a year of tuition, paid at a window in August. $1,400 for a used Baldwin, the color of strong coffee, with a middle C that ran a little flat instead of a little bright. She left it that way on purpose. The remainder sat untouched. Somebody's going to need it, she said. I just don't know who yet. The basement took 11 weekends, 900 pounds of a dead woman's life. And Cordell would come down and pick a thing up and stand there holding it, and Imani learned not to talk. They found Ruthie's mother's hymnal in the last box, and he sat on a milk crate, holding it for a quarter of an hour without making a sound. The church took 9 boxes in April. He cried in the parking lot afterward, both hands flat on the roof of the Buick. and then wiped his face and said, well, and they drove to Merrick Boulevard and got fish sandwiches. And in February, in the fellowship hall with her coat on, she opened the folder. It had been in the plastic bin for 5 months, and she had never once looked inside. For the same reason, she never opened the envelope. 14 sheets of bent arrangement paper, ruled for wins, because that's what a middle school band teacher has, with bass clef staves drawn underneath each line by hand with a straight edge. Lenox Road, across the top in blocky capitals, and under it, smaller, for my daughter when she's ready. Berna had copied the whole thing out in ink in 2019 because Otis's pencil was smudging, and on page 4 in the margin, oh, this modulation is showing off. V, it stopped mid-bar on page 14. Not at a cadence, mid-phrase, third, unfinished figure in the left hand. Because a man put a pencil down Sunday to go teach H on Monday. She read it through without playing a note. Then she played it, and it was, she said herself plainly, which is why people trusted her about everything else. Not a great piece of music. It was a good one. The work of a man who understood voices better than he understood the piano. Things that sat wrong under the hand. A modulation on page 4 that was showing off, but there was a tune in it. 2 bars repeated up a third. And then a turn at the end of the 4th bar that she'd never heard anybody do and would not have thought of in 100 years. He'd built the whole thing out of that one turn. She worked on it 7 months. The last 8 bars took 9 attempts because she kept trying to make them impressive. The version that worked was quiet. She played it for Cordell at 11 at night before his shift. That's your daddy, he said. Yeah, no, I mean, I can hear him. I never met the man in my life and I can hear him. Backstage was cold. 71 degrees on the street in September, and she kept her cardigan on until 4 minutes before. Her hands were warm. She'd seen to it. 90 minutes of scales next to a radiator, then hot water. Then she kept jammed in her armpits like a farmhand while a stage manager talked about sight lines. 2 minutes. She thought about a carpet on the 31st floor. About a woman behind bulletproof glass saying anything else, About the sound a piano makes going around a 2nd floor landing. About a kitchen drawer with a carbon book in it, and 61 receipts in her own handwriting. 1 minute, and about the ticket she'd mailed 3 weeks earlier to an address in Rye. Swan, seat back row, house left, and a card with nothing written on it except a line of information, the way you'd write it on a flyer taped in a laundromat window. Adult beginners, Thursdays, 7 p.m., Room B, Farmers Boulevard, $18, no signature. She'd decided in July she wasn't going off to find out whether he opened it, and she was keeping that. She handed off the cardigan and walked out. It's a long walk at Lincoln Center, longer than the Meridian. This time she wasn't walking toward a piano to prove she could play one. This time it was just a Tuesday. She sat, found the knobs, turned them counterclockwise twice each, slid back 4 inches, right foot over the damper pedal without pressing it, opened the fallboard. The keys were warm. That was the difference, and it was the only one that mattered. Somebody did this instrument every day. It had been asked to do things. Hi, she thought. Then she put her hands in her lap and rolled her wrists, slowly both directions, for a full 60 seconds in front of a sold-out house, because you do not drive a car out of a driveway at 50 miles an hour. And then she played The Winter Wind, the way she'd come to play it in a cold fellowship ball in Queens with her coat on. Not faster than October. Cleaner. The right hand kept its edges from the first bar to the last, and the left hand came in behind the beat at the return, half a breath late, the way a woman walks against weather. Minute 3 came and went and did not exist. It ended in the 2 chords at the bottom of the instrument, and the hall took them, and there was that half second where big room decides what it's going to do. Imani lifted her hands off the keys, and she didn't stand up. She didn't bow, didn't look out. She kept her eyes on the music desk and put both hands back in her lap and let the noise happen above her and around her and past her. And it took a while, and she waited anyway. When it stopped, she still didn't look up, she said, into the small microphone, clipped to the instrument. My father wrote this. That was all. No story, no accident, no hospital, no restaurant, no man in a charcoal suit. She'd written 4 versions of a paragraph and thrown everyone out, because each one turned the piece into an explanation of her. She let it be what it was, which was a piece of music a middle school chin teacher wrote for his daughter over 6 years of Sunday afternoons. It's called Lenox Road, and she played it. 2 bars repeated up a third, and then that turn at the end of the 4th bar that nobody would have thought of. It's a quiet piece. There's no storm in it. It will never be on anybody's list of the hardest 4 minutes in the repertoire, and the modulation on page 4 is showing off. And she played it exactly as written, because her mother had said so in the margin in 2019, and there was no version of this world in which Imani was going to correct her. Halfway through, something came up in her chest that she'd been carrying since a Thursday night in August 3 years earlier. It didn't go away. She didn't fight it. She just kept her hands moving. And she thought, in the middle of the second page, with 2,600 people in front of her and both her parents 9 feet away in a stack of paper, somebody wrote in pencil, "I am not the ending of anybody's story. I am the middle of my own. The last 8 bars are the quiet ones." She played them and let the pedal come up slowly and put her hands back in her lap. The hall emptied over about 40 minutes. She came back through at 10:30 with her coat over her arm because she'd left her music bag under the piano and the stage door took you the long way around. House lights, zap. Seats folded. A woman vacuuming the second aisle. Back row, house left. Seat 108. A program on the cushion, folded once. Nothing written on it. No note inside. She checked and there was nothing, and she stood there a second with it in her hand. Then she put it back exactly where it had been. She didn't tell anybody about it for 2 years. The plaque went up at the Meridian in November. Very small, on the left side of the lid, a name and a date. Gideon Pyle paid for it out of his own pocket and has never mentioned that to anybody. The piano gets played 4 nights a week now on a rotation, with a sign-up sheet in the manager's office and a waiting list on the back of it. 4 middle schools got a full instrumental program that year, funded 4 years, from a foundation incorporated in Delaware with 3 trustees, none of them named Prescott. No press release, no plaque, nothing on any door. Corinne Doherty's piece ran 11,000 words and spent its last 4,000 not on a villain, but on a machine. On what happens when a 20-year-old signs a financial responsibility agreement at 2 in the morning with nobody there to read it for her. On default judgments entered against people who were never really served. On hospitals with a charity policy on the website that never screened one patient for it. On how 91,000 of internet kindness can be gone inside 18 hours, every step of it legal. Its last line was this: she got a story because she could do a rare thing. The 400 other women who lost a bed in this city that month could not. That is the problem, and the video did not fix it, and neither will this. Ellis Prescott left the foundation in the spring. He turned up 11 months later doing intake at a legal aid office in the Bronx for $61,000 a year, and nobody has ever gotten a satisfactory explanation out of him, including his father. And on a Thursday in October, a year and 1 week after a man in a charcoal suit stood up from a table and asked a hungry woman what she was hoping to find, Imani Stroud was in room B at 4 minutes to 7, setting out folding chairs. Dolores was already there in her scrubs, running her 12 bars, which had become 40 bars without looking at her hands. The doors are opened. A man came in, 59 years old, in a jacket that didn't fit him anymore, and he stood in the doorway a moment the way people do when they're deciding whether to be embarrassed. "Is this the beginner class?" "It is," Imani said. "Come on in. I haven't played in a very long time." Most people haven't. He came in, sat down on the bench, and put his hands on the keys, and they were not the right hands. And they were never going to be the right hands, and it was going to take him a year to get through 8 bars. "All right," Imani said. "First take your hands off." He took his hands off. "Put them in your lap." He put them in his lap. "Now roll your wrists," she said. "Slow both directions." He looked up at her. 60 seconds, Imani said. "Every single time. No exceptions."